Today's guest is known as the guy who brought Spey fishing and Spey rods to the U.S. He travels the world fishing and works with some of the biggest brands in the country. He's also been on this podcast 3 times and has covered Spey, Chinook fishing, stillwaters, and more. He has an equally amazing life in the hunting space, and today he's going to shed some light on archery so you know where you can get started this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, how's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing Podcast. I have been fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and hunters than just about anyone out there. George Cook, legendary Spey angler, is going to give us an update on the status of Spey. He's going to talk about Chinook, where we're heading, Steelhead fishing, and we're going to find out why he's optimistic on where we're headed with Steelhead and some of the other topics today. We're going to hear about the new Sage Spey rod. We're going to find out how many Chinook he caught on his last trip, and then we're going to dig into some tips and tricks on archery and hunting this season. Plus, you're going to find out how to stock a buck, plus the 3 most important factors in casting a Spey rod, all in this episode. George is going to bring it. He always does. Here we go. George Cook at MuleDeer16 on Instagram. How you doing, George?
Good morning, good sir.
It's great to have you back on. We've, I believe, 4 episodes. This is our 4th, so I think you're we're doing well. We've got you on. Are you getting bored yet of this podcast stuff?
I just want to make the all-star team, David.
Well, I think you're on it. I was just thinking the other day about back when I was a kid on the All-Star, the baseball team. I remember I was an alternate one year, and it was like, oh, man, that was not the good place to be in. You kind of want to be like up front, right? Be the All-Star, be the leader of the team. Was that kind of your thing in sports? Were you always the leader of the team?
No. I was one of those guys that I played a lot, but I probably, at the end of the day, didn't achieve at the right moments. I think I saved it all for fly fishing and bow hunting.
Right. That's it. So you found your groove. Well, we've got a lot to catch up on. You know, I won't go into depth on your whole background. We've got 3 other episodes where you talked about kind of how you came through the Spey has been huge. You were there at the beginning of all that, and a lot of people talk about you as a pivotal person in that, that phase of fly fishing. But you do a lot of hunting too. I think maybe half of what you do is hunting related. So today we're going to switch it up a little bit and talk about bow hunting and all that. But before we get there, just give us a little update. I know you're a busy guy. What's been going on since? I think it's been about a year since we actually had you on the show. What's been up the last month?
Well, the last year, David, I had a heck of a bow season in North America. Last fall and in winter, killed my all-time biggest mule deer, Oregon buck, archery buck, 217, 2/8. But I've had a really a fun, adventurous spring. I went to Spain in late March, tipped over 3 different species ibex and a roebuck. Had a fantastic hunt over there with guys I've gone with before. Followed that up with an archery black bear hunt on the Quinault Indian Reservation here in Washington State. And then I did a 10-day safari in Mozambique, of which I'd been to Africa 5 times previous, but hadn't done the dangerous game. And I killed 2 fantastic Cape Buffalo rifle, have 3.75 will travel, and shot some super duper kudu, 54, 55 inches, and a lot of other stuff, including a 14-inch warthog, which was, maybe the biggest shocker of the bunch. But yeah, great time. Just spent the last 3 weeks in Alaska doing stuff that's close to both you and I's hearts. Just came off the Nushgak Friday. 2 of us had a really good go for kings on the Spey game. 2 of us hooked 73 in 7 days. And we got enough fish in that 14 to 22 pound range to make it interesting. I know those numbers are not eye-popping, but it's kind of what's left up in the 907. The king thing is very, very fragile at this point, but we had some good fortune on the Nushgak fishing through Rapids Camp Lodge.
Rapids Camp, okay. Wow, yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to check in with you on, is how is the Chinook looking? I know there's been a lot of closures, and 73 sounds like a lot, but what would be a back in the heyday. But maybe first, when was the heyday and what were the numbers like then?
Well, I think the heyday could be considered anything from 1978 to 2018. I think you could take that 50 years and make that the heyday. It's also a reasonable time frame when a lot of the listeners were in on some or all of that. But I'd say it's fallen off dramatically since 2018, although there's a bright spot here or there, be it British Columbia or Alaska. All in all, it's really at a fragile moment in time, particularly in the state of Alaska, statewide, and we're lucky to have the opportunity in the fisheries that we've still got left, which quite frankly can almost be counted on one hand. We did get to fish all these new Sage R8 Spey rods, largely 8 weights, some 9s, and that was great to finally get all those things in one quiver and rolling riverside. That was fantastic. So that was as much a part of the fishing as the fishing.
Right. That's always a good conversation on the rods because there's always, it seems like, new updates on rods. Give us a little quick rundown on the Sage, on these rods. How are they different than maybe what's been out there in the past?
Well, they're very interesting in that the series basically has 2 families in one series, and these came out last winter, and there's a pile of models, everything from a 5 to a 10 weight in the Spey, a 7 in an 8 weight in a switch, or as I call them, baby Spey. And in that, there's 3 that are distinctively European in action, meaning faster. The 8126, which has probably been the overall teacher's pet amongst almost everybody who's played with it. 9140-6 and the Hammer of God, the 10150. Those 3 are fast. The remainder of the group, which again is 5 weights through 9s, fall under what I call Pacific Northwest soulful smooth and incredibly intuitive to cast, in that just pick it up and cast and actually pull some of the octane out of what you might normally do in order to watch these things function at the highest level with the least amount of effort. And so they're really interesting from that perspective of lightweight, responsive, and just don't require a big pile of octane in order to get them to really, really excel.
Right. That's awesome. I know these sound amazing. What with your Spey, as you talk about all these rods, it seems like sometimes that's the cool thing about the Spey game is that it made it, it made steelheading, especially in some of these species, like doable for people. Like you didn't have to learn to cast a 8 weight, 9-foot 8 weight for like a country mile, right? You could just get these things.
Well, 9.5 or 10-foot 8 weight, which is really what it was, say in most of the 1980s, dealing with actually having to pick water that you could function in versus fishing any water that you will function in. So, yeah, the Spey has opened up the avenues on many, many river systems throughout the Pacific Rim, for anglers of, all ages and abilities. And it's, you've heard me say this before, David. Yeah. It's very similar to the archery game. Spey is just more interesting. It's just more interesting. And when you're not catching fish every other cast, because anadromous is certainly not yellow perch fishing, you got to be in love with casting because you're fixing to do a bunch of it. And Spey really lends a hand to the joy of casting. And every cast is truly a chance to work on your craft.
Yeah, I love it. That's it. I think that is what people love about it. It's a different thing. And even myself, I struggle all the time. Like for you, when you're casting the Spey, you're out there for Chinook or whatever. Are you pretty much nailing the cast every time, or are you making some mistakes out there?
Nobody nails them all, David. Not even the great Ed Ward, as I once said to him as he blew a cast downstream of me on the Connect Talk, but then the next 5 were out of this world. But nobody hits them all. And the biggie is to self-diagnose when one doesn't go right, and it generally comes off of 3 spots. Comes off the anchor stroke, the D-loop stroke, or the forward stroke. And really the key, particularly when we teach classes, and I taught a bunch of them in Anchorage last month, and mainly women, by the way, who were enthusiastic and after it. You got to be able to self-diagnose. So when we teach, a big part of what we teach folks is to recognize and self-diagnose, because I haven't developed my Spey parrot yet, David.
Right.
My Spey parrot, if I can get him developed and sell him for $199.99, he'll sit on your shoulder and tell you everything you should have done.
Right. You don't have that. Is this similar? We have Bruce Richards coming on here probably this month, and we're going to talk probably single hand, I guess, but he's got this 6-step approach, to figuring out what your people are doing. Is Spey similar to that approach, or is it a lot different than the single hand?
Well, there's certainly common denominators. And by the way, when Bruce comes on, you are to tell him hello for me.
I will.
That guy's a legend. His accomplishments and contributions in this industry are extremely notable over the course of time. Yeah, there's common denominators. There's things that will show up in a Spey cast, again, in the anchor, in the D-loop, in the forward stroke. And most everything that goes wrong can be traced back to one of those 3 buckets, as I like to call it. So, Bruce obviously will lay out a lot of stuff on the single-handed theater, whereas the Spey thing, there's probably more than 3, but there's 3 that we like to focus on because we don't want too much more than those 3, certainly with beginners, because they got a lot going on to digest right out of the gate. I don't want the wheels coming off their buses if I can avoid it.
Right. So you'd keep it simple. Did you have a mix of like total beginners and people that were more advanced?
I had a little bit of all of that within these classes out of Anchorage that were put on they were sponsored by Women's Fly Fishing, which is a really great group of gals out of Anchorage that are doing lots for the women's community. And they granted me time and space to work with a number of gals. And I saw gals that had never done it before. I had some that had played around with it. I had some that had definitely done it. It was obvious with the first 2 or 3 casts they made that they had skills, and it was just my chance to help them refine what they were already doing. But it's always great to get new people on the water with a Spey rod, and you just watch them discover the joy of casting. And you can tell with all of them, they know places where they can take this new skill set and suddenly go be far more dangerous as anglers.
Yeah. What is, if somebody's listening now, and we probably won't get deep into the tips and tricks on casting for Spey, but where would you send them if somebody's listening now and they want to up their Spey game? What's the best thing to do?
Well, it depends on where they live. I mean, for folks on the West Coast, there's a plethora of instructors scattered about in Oregon and Washington. Travis Johnson in Oregon comes to mind. John Hazlett in Medford, one of the greats. Charles St. Pierre up here out of Tacoma. These are some of the real premier guys, but there's loads of them. I'm forgetting. Hogan from Utah does traveling seminars.
Oh, nice.
And some of the longtime best ones available to folks in North America. I could go on, but that's a small sampling of a great group.
Yeah, that's by far the best thing, right? I mean, get an instructor and practice, right? Don't just practice while you're on the water fishing.
Well, it's like golf, man. Yeah, it's like golf. It's like archery. It's like tennis. This stuff you need somebody on your shoulder, because the one thing you don't want to do is practice bad. You don't want to ingrain bad. You want to know where your points of focus need to be, just that, focused. And an instructor can really, really put that into motion and take you to the next level. And really, one-on-one stuff, 1 or 2 hours turns out to be a load of it. When we've got, classes of 4 to 6, those will stretch out to 2 to 3 hours. But, if you do a one-on-one with one of these guys, a Josh Lynn, a John Hazlett, 1.5 hours is a lot when it's one-on-one, and you'll gain a lot in that. Anyone would. So don't be shy. If you need to find one of these guys, look me up on Instagram. I'll help direct you. No problem.
Imagine your perfect cast in the pristine waters of Bristol Bay, the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. Togiak Lodge sits in this unique paradise, offering unmatched fishing amidst breathtaking landscapes. Envision yourself right now amidst nature's best, with every fish narrating its own epic tale. You can visit togiaklodge.com right now. That's Togiak, Togiak. Your story woven into the fabric of Bristol Bay, where every cast is a memory, every fish is unforgettable. Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters is your go-to resource for swung fly techniques, two-handed casting, and anadromous fish. Find out why Waters West has built a cult-like following around their fly tying materials and why they are the go-to resource for the OP and beyond. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/waterswest right now to check in with Ed and Kyle and get all geared up to get on the water. So this is great. Well, like always, the Spey, we all love hearing about the Spey and all that. I do want to turn it into the hunting because that's something we haven't talked deep, and it seems like you're just as out there on the hunting stuff, but maybe talk about that. Is your hunting always been, have you always been hunting and fly fishing, or did one come before the other?
Well, I was fly fishing from the time I was 11. I didn't really start hunting until I was in college at Washington State, which was a great landing spot for somebody who wanted to go afield. And it was, it was then, it still is today, one of the great meccas for pheasant hunting, which I undertook at a level that fortunately my parents never figured out what I was doing with classes, but because I would take a very small load in the fall and a giant load in the spring so I could bird hunt. And deer hunting for me, had kind of a slow start. I don't think I killed a buck. I'm not sure I even saw a buck until the fourth season of my deer hunting, which was my senior year at Washington State. And I finally tipped over a small 3-point whitetail after a fairly epic 3+ mile track meet to catch up with him. So my deer hunting career took off in 1983, and I've had the good fortune of having taken 316 bucks in that time. I'm a pretty passionate deer hunter, particularly mule deer and whitetail, although I've hunted all the species, but those two are my faves. My first hunt coming up is only 61 days away. Archery blacktail in Southern Oregon out of Medford opens August 31st. So when I get off this call with you, good sir, I'll probably go shoot a handful of arrows.
All right. So you're doing that. So you're shooting some arrows, and on the Spey, are you still practicing the Spey, or is that something that you don't really have to do that much anymore?
No, George doesn't need to practice Spey. And I don't say that in a cocky manner, but rather, what George, like everybody else, needs is just more time on the water. Get off the porch, get on the ditch, and go fish. And I'm sure we're going to bounce between these subjects because we can't help it, David. But
yeah,
it's July 1. I mean, as you look out over the landscape, we're about to be in the heart of summer run steelhead fishing in California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and even Western Idaho, which is kind of my favorite, the old Clearwater. And we're about to be in it. I suspect this week we'll hear about the first steelhead caught on the lower Deschutes.
Yeah. I love that you said that, the lower Deschutes, because we were planning a trip. We usually go a little bit later, but I always like to go early July sometimes, just basically to practice. And occasionally, you'll get a fish, right?
Well, I think anytime after July 3rd, there's fish in the river. Brian O'Keefe has kind of made it a pilgrimage over his, many, many, many years of fishing and photography of, I'll bet you he's on the Deschutes the next 3 or 4 days. And if he does what he historically does, he will have hooked 1 to 3 that first day out. So it's go time.
Well, here's a good question for you, George, because I feel like a little bit of a weenie here, but it's going to be, I just looked at the forecast. I've been looking all week. I always do this with my trips. 2 weeks prior, I start looking at the forecast. Okay, how are we doing? How's the rain looking? How's the weather? It's going to be 110 degrees on Saturday. And I feel like for me, when it gets that hot, it's hard to do anything. I mean, would you be fishing if it's at that level?
The typical summer run thing kind of consists of the following. Deschutes being a prime A1's example of this. You're going to fish dawn. You're probably 10:30 to 11:30. And you can fish floating line or maybe a little intermediate, poly-style leader off a Scandi. The first thing in the morning with a traditional fly, any number of things would be applicable on the Deschutes, a green butt skunk, a streetwalker, any number of purple or black hue traditional flies. And then you get around somewhere in that 10:30 to 11:30, the thermals are typically up and running in the canyons of the Deschutes, really just anywhere in that country. And wind is going to be upon you, and it's going to be upon you until early to mid-evening. A lot of guys, go kick it in the shade. They go take a nap. The savvy put on a sink tip, could be a 15-foot type 6, could be a 12.5-foot hunk of T8 or 10-foot hunk of T14. They put on an all red fly or maybe a red-orange fly, and they go ply those waters part of the midday, and you'd be surprised how many of those early fish will come to that sort of thing. So there's an opportunity to be the all-day guy or just the morning, evening guy, prime time, shade, coolest temperatures of the day. That's what you're looking at, David.
Yeah, you're right. No, there's definitely, that's the cool thing about it. You got the early morning, late, even if it's 110, you could still fish early when it's only, 80 that day or whatever it's going to be, 75, 80. So that's good. No, I'm excited. This is hopefully, and I have heard some good things, like you go around, you hear all these, the negatives on this decline of the steelhead, and there's definitely truth to that. Yeah, I hear other things, like the OP. Yeah, I think Trevor Kovich maybe was talking about this on a recent episode with In the Bucket. I'm not sure if you heard about In the Bucket, but we've got Brian Niska is doing some stuff with us.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. He's hosting some of our, it's Brian Niska, so he's the host, and he had Trevor Kovich on and some other people, and Trevor was talking about how actually it's not as bad as I think a lot of people are saying. You got your pulse on the steelhead? Do you feel like, obviously there's downturns, but are you more optimistic or more pessimistic on where we're at?
I'm probably neutral to optimistic on the steelhead front because it seems to have more ebb and flow that's on the positive side of the street than, say, the king salmon thing is. And Trevor's right. The OP has been better the last really 3 years than most people would give it credit for. And, there's a number of guides over there. Trevor is certainly one of the premier guides and spokespeople for the OP. Justin Tinsler is another one that I would bring to mind, particularly on the gear side of it, him, Mike Zavadlov. But I would tell you that these guys, they're seeing fishing that they can be, proud to be a part of. And Trevor speaks the gospel. Trevor comes on anything, whether he's standing in a hallway or on a show, he's talking gospel, and perk up and listen to that lad. But the Steelhead Theater, I think, is overall okay. And, I think what a lot of people have smartly done, particularly in Oregon and Washington, is they've kind of taken a different approach across kind of a broad group of people where they're not busy worrying themselves about, am I going to catch anything? What am I going to fish with? Am I going to dredge it out with T14 and T17, which you damn sure can do. And we all know that stuff works and it's effective. But there's a lot of folks that are just getting out there, particularly in the winter. They're running lesser sink tips. They're running 12.5 feet at T11. They're running 15 feet at type 6. They're doing stuff that kind of falls into, what I would call enjoy it, work on the craft. Maybe a more traditional fly, some more basic marabou on a classic Atlantic salmon, size 2 or 4 hook versus intruder. And these guys are just going out there and I'm going to work on my craft. If I catch one, great. If I don't, I spend an enjoyable day on the water and I focused on casting. And, as I remind people all the time, in the 1980s, prior to the teeny 300 24-foot sink tip, 300 grain, we were catching all these steelhead on very modest sink tips. In fact, we probably saw more steelhead caught on a 20-foot type 3 Cortland sink tip and a weight 4 to 8 coming off a 9.5 or a 10-foot 8 weight, like a good Osage RP or RPL. That was catching the majority of the steelhead in the early to mid 80s. And so it's not like you can't fish this lighter stuff that's a little less arduous. You can certainly kind of rig one rod up one way and one rod up another way and have it your way.
Right. Yeah. So you don't have to get down all the time and have the heaviest stuff to be down towards the bottom. You can fish, they're still moving winter, and you're, I guess, talking winter fish a little bit, right? I mean, they're still moving for the fly a little bit, you think?
Well, they've got to. I mean, unless you're fishing with a plug or a spin and glow off pencil lead, that fish inevitably has got to move upwards some distance to take that fly, because the one thing you learn over the years with all this stuff in the sink tip theater, you're never as deep as you might think you are. And it's certainly not deep like a plug fish is, or, something off pencil lead, or a jig that's off a float that's at a designated depth to hit a designated, slot coming through something. That fly is going to get X depth. In all likelihood, we need an alpha class fish to move to take that fly. So that's the reality of that.
This is awesome. Well, this is the perfect, you're talking a little bit of gear. I wanted to ask you this question on the, the fly fishing, archery. Like, it seems like, you've got gear fishing, right? Conventional fishing. And then people sometimes tend to get into fly fishing, right? Maybe it's the harder thing. And then you have rifle hunting for, say, deer or whatever. And then people tend to get into bow hunting. Do you see that? Is there a lot of truth to that? Do you think there's a reason that occurs? Is that a good analogy?
Well, I've always said for years that the most dangerous steelhead guy with a Spey rod is a guy that came off a gear background, because that guy clearly understood water, reading water, fishing water, where these fish have to be, and then could take a fly rod, be it single hand or a Spey rod, and take the craft into another theater. I myself rifle hunted for, goodness gracious, my first 30 years. I didn't pick up a bow until 2014. And it had gotten to the point, rifle hunting for me, I don't know that I'd haul off and say it was too easy, but I would say it was getting to a point where we were looking for bigger and bigger and bigger deer, particularly in the mule deer theater. Anything under 170 Boone and Crockett inches had just become, uninteresting. And the game had gotten to where it was somewhat of a pressure cooker to go out and find these giant bucks. And it was like, God, man, I wish we could start this over. And turns out, pick up a bow, you get to start over. And that deer that you were more than happy to shoot at 150 or 250 or, 399 yards, now the game is, can I get sub 60 yards? Can I get sub 40? Can I get sub 20 yards? And you find out that stalking, particularly mule deer, is a real craft. And I think guys who Spey fish with a Spey rod, they can really resonate with this idea that we're going to take the craft and we're going to go next level with this craft. And, I've shot a fair amount of game with a bow at 60, 70, 80 yards, particularly antelope, because that's just kind of where they hang up. But mule deer in particular are one that we're always trying to get closer. And even when I've gotten, 35 yards from a buck, I'm going to try to see if I can get 25 or 15 yards from that deer. It becomes a game. How close can I get to this thing? And so much has to go right in archery. There's just so many things that can go to pieces in the process. And, mule deer is one of my favorite things with a bow, that and whitetails. So I'll give you one example that's really a fun one. So I hunt South Dakota every year, and it's a bow hunter's paradise, be it for mule deer, be it for whitetails, and even antelope. If you play your cards right, you can end up with more than one tag. 2 years ago, I made 13 stalks in 5 days on mule deer. I got as close as 8 yards to bucks that I passed. I got as close to 15 yards to bucks that I would have drawn and tried to kill. And I had one stalk one day on a buck that I'd seen him at 1.5 miles, lost him, went to look for him, spotted him at 75 yards in a little ditch, eyebrow, saw his horns, backed out, made a move on him, came in, was sub 15 yards of embedded. It was going to wait him out to stand up, which is typically what's going to go on in that deal. And at 15 yards, I took one more step, and 3, maybe 4 prairie chickens got up, the sage grouse, and they spooked not only the deer but me. And all we could do is laugh. That's all we could do.
Gone.
And last year, I killed a buck on the 4th stalk I made. He was a buck that was my backup buck. I'd seen him from 1 mile away, out in the middle of nothing, behind a solitary rock, out in the prairie. I stalked 3 bucks on the way to him, elected to pass on them, found a 4th buck while I was stalking them, passed on him as a whitetail, and then made this huge loop. I got myself 34 yards from my buck, bedded behind a rock, and I was behind a rock, the only other rock out in the prairie, and the sun kept hitting this guy, and every time the sun hit him, he'd move, he'd stand up and move, and he would move around this rock, almost like it was a clock. He was coming around the dial, and eventually he came around, and I shot him at 34 yards at a 1/4-2 angle, which is something I typically don't want to take. But I felt like I could get it in there, and I did, and he made it a mere 80 yards after hit. But it just, you think about that, and that was 17 stalks in 2 seasons, and I felled a mule deer. But, I had so many great encounters and moves to try to get on these guys, and we often get on them, but things go to pieces at point-blank range. So it's the never-ending challenge of archery, which I think can be assembled to fly fishing in general, in Spey specifically. I think you can draw some really cool parallels, no doubt, David.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. And what about, so you started, it's been 10 years of bow hunting. If somebody's listening now, they haven't got into bow hunting, give us a few little high-level, tips on where to get started, maybe a little on the gear. What should somebody know? You know a lot about the gear, right? You're in that industry.
I am. It's my other life, as I call it, on the hunting side. My agency reps Stone Glacier, Crispy Boots, rig 'em right on the waterfowl thing, and we're pretty active on the fall side of things. And, the cool thing with bow hunting, the cool thing with archery is that, once you're set up and you're rolling, your ability to shoot, without dragging yourself out to a rifle range, which, unless you live on your own farm or ranch, is going to require a half a day of your time and some organization and planning. I can walk outside either one of the places I tend to be the most when I'm home. I can walk outside and I can shoot. Like, I can walk out the door that I'm approximately 20 feet from and be shooting in mere seconds. And I can shoot out to 50 yards here, and another place where I'm at a lot, I can shoot out to 80 yards. So my ability to shoot and just work on the craft is a lot easier than running around with a rifle or a muzzleloader. The cool thing with archery is you're always learning. You're always trying to get better. You're always trying to be more consistent. Again, you can draw those parallels to fly casting and specifically to Spey. But I think for a lot of people, archery is just shooting, much less hunting. Just shooting a bow, and the process that goes on in shooting that bow is such that it's relaxing. It's a great way to just kind of put your day aside and go from busy lives that we all lead and go into a rhythm and a sequence and a process, and let's shoot our bow. And whether you shoot 6 shots or 36 shots in a session, that focus is going to remain from that first shot to the last shot.
Right. So practice is like everything, right? Practice is huge. What is the Maybe talk about the bows a little bit. If somebody is getting started, they're new to it. What type? There's different types of bows out there, right? And different thoughts.
There's a lot of bows out there. There's a lot of great bows out there. There's traditional bows like long bows and recurves. And then there's, compound bows, which most of the bow hunters in the U.S. are hunting with compound bows. And there's some great companies out there. I'm a Bowtech guy. I'm a ambassador for Bowtech. They're also one of my accounts. They're an Oregon bow company, so they're the homegrown made good. And they've got a ton of excellent bows to accommodate shooters of all ages and all strengths and types. But there's a lot of great bows out there. All the archery companies are putting out the best equipment they've ever had. And so it's a wonderful time for anybody to be a part of archery or to get involved in archery, because equipment has never been better, whether it be bows, sights, releases, stabilizers, the availability of targets, both variety and type. Instructors are out there in the archery game just like they're out there in the Spey game or the golf game. And it's something you can do with friends and family. It's something you can do with, kids. You can get them on little bows and get them going. And it's fun. It's a game. It's particularly the little kids. It's a game. It's something a family can do. A guy and a gal and a guy with his kids, mom and daughter. Everybody's got a crack at this game. So
yeah,
it's really cool and cathartic for many folks is to be able to go out and, God, I got to shoot my bow today. It was like, yeah, it's like same person. I rode my bike today.
Right. So without hunting, and I love that you went down the family, because that's something with my kids. We had this really cool rifle hunt last year. The kids were there, they're 10 and 12, and they kind of sat back at camp while we were, Megan and I were out shooting bucks, and it was this amazing trip. But they're not totally into the rifle. It's like, I'm not going to really give them a rifle right now. They're not quite, I think I could slowly, but I feel like the bow is something. In fact, they said the other day, I got them a little kind of a kid's bow. But what's a good, I guess Bowtech, I'm sure, has some kids stuff. Where do you start with the kids? Bows, they have all that.
Oh yeah. You've got the little kid bows that are, basically, a step above the Walmart bow with the rubber stopper arrows, which, for little kids, that gets them flinging arrows. But there'll be a step above that. And then the next step is to say the Bowtech line is an Edge 325, which is a bow that can go down to sub 30 pounds all the way up to 60. And you get these bows that have got this wide range. Think of it as 15 to 45 pounds, 20 to 60 pound pull. And you can get a kid onto that. And you say, well, what size kid? Well, I think most kids can handle a bow like that.
So I have, and just in my example, I've got two girls that are not huge, they're just kind of normal sized girls. So probably something on the lower end.
Well, how old are they?
10 and 12.
Yeah, they're right there. They're right at the get them going deal at that age. And, I kind of look at a lot of kids, and it's an odd number, but it's the number I kind of assign to a lot of things in the sporting theater, is when they hit 11. When they hit 11, it seems like focus-wise, attention-wise, there's a lot more you can do with them prior to that age, when you maybe can only get X amount of time and of attention out of them.
Right. I feel like that is the case. Yeah, well, you got to keep them away from the devices. That's the problem, right? You got all these phones and things that they're getting addicted to. You got to keep them away from that. I think that's why, planting the seed of this stuff, whether it's a river trip or fly fishing or whatever, I think that's the key with kids. So you talked Bowtech. That's good. We can start there. What would be, again, going back to the complete beginner, do they just go into their Sportsman's Warehouse or search online?
Well, they should find an archery pro shop. Okay. And think of the archery pro shop as the archery equivalent of the fly fishing pro shop. You certainly can get things at a Sportsman's or a Cabela's or a Bass Pro, but you're not going to get the attention to detail and the attention to you as an individual shooter that you will get through that pro shop visit, that experience. And typically, you take a metropolitan area, you just Google archery pro shops, and you probably find, for instance, in Tacoma, Seattle, there's somewhere around 2 to 4 of them.
Oh, so there's definitely more fly shops out there.
There's definitely more fly shops than archery pro shops, but you find one, you meet the guys, you get them working with you, and oftentimes it's gals. The Bowtech pro shop down in Eugene has got a staff of both guys and gals, and they're all super, super tuned into the ball game. And most folks in these archery pro shops, like fly pro shops, they're expert on putting together a bow, getting a bow set up for you as an individual, getting you shooting generally on the spot with an indoor range or a quick outside range. And that's the beauty of the pro shop is we're putting a bow together, we're walking around the corner to the indoor range, and we're shooting at 20 yards, and we're getting going, and we're getting you going, day of discovery, as I like to call it. And that's a big deal. I mean, it's equivalent to, hey, I want to try this rod. Well, we'll step outside and put a wait forward 5 on this 590-4 R8 core, and let's cast it. Let's see what all the excitement's about. Same thing with a bow. So, find a pro shop, go visit, shoot some bows, figure out a draw weight, which is the poundage of the bow. And you don't have to be a He-Man, be shooting 70 or 80 pounds as a guy.
It's just like casting, right? You don't have to cast 100 feet, right, with the Spey.
Well, yeah, we don't need 90 octane all the time. Yeah, my bows are all 60, 61, 63. A lot of my friends shoot 70. The odd buddy of mine shooting an 80-pound bow. They're a lot younger than me. The 60 is fast enough. Bucky's got a hard time getting away from 60. And particularly when you know how Bucky acts, Bucky's got a hard time getting away from me.
Squala Fly Fishing builds gear to solve problems and keep you comfortable on the water. For 2024, they've released the new Back 80 wader, which features all the rugged, bomber, fish-hard durability of their RS wader in a new streamlined, performance-focused, zipperless design. And I can't say enough about Squala, from their waders to their technical gear. It all fits perfect and has uses for multiple environments and multiple situations. I keep going back to the Thermal 150 hoodie, which has been my go-to for everything. Keeps the sun rays off in just about any environment, and I even started using this thing while jogging. It's amazing. This thing, whether you're sweating or cold or keeping the rays off, check out the Thermal 150 hoodie and check out that merino wool feel. And you can check out Squala right now and support this podcast by heading over to wetflyswing.com/Squala. You can step into extreme comfort with Squala right now. It's interesting because the mule deer, I always think of mule deer as kind of more of the range, shooting further, but I guess mule deer are all over the place. Are you hunting them mostly in more like forest habitats, or what does that look like?
No, more open habitats. I mean, last year I killed an archery mule deer in Oregon, killed him out of a tree stand in between a feeding bedding area, giant buck, 217, Pope and Young buck, giant buck of a lifetime, really, maybe 3 lifetimes. I shot one in Montana at 31 yards in a creek bed. I shot that buck at 34 in South Dakota. And I killed a lot of whitetail bucks in some other states, Washington, Texas, Coahuila, Mexico, and then I killed some Coues deer with a bow in Sonora, Mexico. We hunted the Coues deer off water. We're generally tree stands and ground blinds on most of the Texas and Mexico stuff, and on whitetails.
Wow. So kind of going back to that. So basically, go find your archery pro shop, get your bow, start practicing. What is the next? What are some other tips you would give somebody to get ready so they can get out there and maybe have a shot at a deer? I guess there's the other thing is the hunting, right? You got that whole thing.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, you've got folks that inevitably just want to shoot a bow. Maybe don't want to hunt, but maybe want to explore the hunting end of it. Generally in the West, generally speaking, in all the Western states, be it California, be it Wyoming, the Dakotas, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, so on and so forth, there's almost always an ability to go bow hunting on an early season, possibly a late season basis with an easy to acquire tag. Archery tags are oftentimes over the counter for residents in most of the states, Western states, and for sure in the Midwest and the East generally are that. Some are draws in some states, but an archery tag is an easier tag to get. So if you want to hunt deer, your first year of bow hunting, your odds of getting a tag in the West are pretty good. And then you can look to go afield. There's often seasons that are liberal. The whole month of September, for instance, virtually the whole month of September is archery in Oregon as well as Colorado. Some states open in August. Nevada and Utah typically open in early August. And then some states have got late bow hunts. They've got bow hunts in November or December. Oklahoma, as an example, archery for mule deer and whitetails goes all the way to January 15th. Texas goes all the way through January. Alabama goes through January. So, you can become a real student of opportunity with the bow, both early and late. And then the other thing, which, you can't hardly have one of these conversations without talking about it, is building preference points, in the Midwest and the West as a whole. You may want to hunt mule deer in Nevada or Arizona. And your ticket to doing that is building what we call preference points, where you put in for draws or you buy point-only options in the Western states, and you start becoming a student of preference points throughout the West. It'll gobble up some space on your Visa card, but it's how you're going to play this game in order to draw some of these states and places.
Right. Is that how you do it? You look at the places and you just pretty much, you start putting in for all the states that you want to go?
Well, I put in for kind of a portfolio, right? It's what most people end up with. I've currently got 5 points in Iowa, which means I'm set up to draw an archery tag in 2025. I've got 4 or 5 points in Kansas. I would draw any unit for whitetail. I've got a bunch of points in Colorado. You develop a portfolio. You figure out what critters you'd really like to chase in what states, and you start building a portfolio of preference points in order to achieve that adventure, that goal, and going to Colorado for mule deer or trying to draw a tag in Nevada, blah, blah, blah.
What about elk?
Yeah, well, I hunt elk every year. I've got a bow hunt, and golly, I think I'm about 76 days away from Montana. I've got a Montana tag for archery. I've got an Oregon rifle tag. So I've got a couple of elk hunts on the agenda this year, 1 rifle, 1 bow. And, people love elk. In Oregon, anytime you're at a sports show, we do that Portland show every year for Crispy Boots, and it's elk, 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 and more elk. It's archery elk. It's rifle elk. I mean, in Alaska, it's moose. Man, you get your moose. In Oregon, it's elk. And in the West in general, particularly the Northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, it's all about elk. I mean, deer is there. Deer will have participants and enthusiasts, but elk, and more elk. And archery elk is huge in the West and huge in Oregon in particular.
Yeah. And is archery elk, I would guess that it's probably more challenging, but they're such big animals. I feel like deer is a challenge, like we said, because you're having to stalk them. I mean, elk, you're in the forest a lot of times, right? You're able to hunker. Is one or the other easier?
Archery elk in September under the right conditions, where it's September is the rut for elk in Western North America, along with Western Canada, and they go into the rut. They're very vocal. They bugle. They're you can find them based on listening for them. You can call them in. You can sit on wallows and water holes. You can do a lot to get yourself in a position to get a good quality shot on a bull. The month of September is where it's at for that, even early October, where it's still open in some states like Montana, like Colorado, not Colorado, but there's some other states that are still open for archery into early October. But elk are fun. Deer are fun. Nothing with a bow is easy. There ain't nothing easy with a bow. But archers get a heck of an opportunity with this September rut for bull elk. And, occasionally they get some late seasons for archery. And then, you get to go truly afoot on these things, spot and stalk. And that's a hard elk to kill with a bow versus a rifle as a late season one. But again, it's all about opportunity. That's the beauty of archery, is that the opportunity is often early. It's sometimes late. It's extended seasons, liberal seasons. There's a lot of reasons to get involved in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like that's the cool thing about it, right? You get these more opportunities. You can get in there early because some of these rifle hunts are crazy, right? You got some people like I wouldn't even go out hunting. There's so many people out there with rifles, shooting in the woods. But do you feel like that's a big part of it, is that you actually, and then also, does that change now that more people are getting into it? Are you seeing that there's going to be more restrictions on archery?
Well, I mean, most, things are a draw. Like Oregon's a draw for elk. Colorado's mostly a draw for elk. Montana's completely a draw, as is Wyoming. Most of the Western states are, right? And so tag numbers are allocated. So first of all, you got to draw some. Second of all, you got a plan to go. And, the one thing about hunting big game in the West, which also applies to, Western Canada and Alaska, is thou who is willing to leave the road is probably going to discover, a playground that the average hunter never knew was out there. You'd be shocked that, once you've left the road, a half mile, a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, you've got a lot better shot at solitude. Now, the archery elk enthusiasts in the West, particularly these young guys who are fleet and fit, light and fast, as I like to call them, those kids, they get off the road and they go and they go and they go. But, go get in the woods and don't be afraid to get off the road and go in the woods and backpack in and set up a spike camp or a base camp. And the whole archery elk phenomena, really elk hunting as a whole in the Western U.S., it's this once a year deal, whether you're a bow hunter or rifle guy, and a lot of prep goes into it. The prep of getting ready, bow ready. Are you bow ready? Are you in shape? I started on the Great and Fearless leg press on Friday, 2 months out, and believe me, it'll be all I can do to walk today. But it's part of the process, and it's, putting in supplies and cash and stuff for a spike camp or a base camp for archery elk or rifle camp. It's all part of the ritual. And, in Alaska, it's all about moose. And I've hunted Alaska a lot. I lived in Alaska at one point, and everything is about moose hunting. And often in the West, it's driven by elk. And there's a lot of prep and there's a lot of tradition and just the process.
Right. That's it. Yeah, we love the process. It's like planning for the trips, right? You're always, whether it's fishing or hunting, I think that we all really enjoy that, right? Is that something that I always love to think of the travel, right? You're around, you just talked about you're over in like Africa, right? All over the place. Are you still loving the traveling, the flights, all that stuff? Does that get you fired up?
I mean, 15 hours from Atlanta to Johannesburg is hard to get super excited about, but they make it so you can watch. I watch more movies than I watch all year on airplanes, so I'm okay with it. But, when this Oregon blacktail hunt comes off starting August 31st, I'll drive from Olympia, Washington to Medford, Oregon, and I'll drive, the I-5 corridor. I'll probably see some deer driving. I usually do. And that time of year, I might even spot a bear off I-5. It's that time of year when I've seen them, particularly down there south of Centralia. Yeah, it's all part of it, man. We got to travel to get there, and we'll get there, and we'll get ourselves set up with our little base camp and get ready to roll. And yeah, September's a big month for archers. It's a big month for me. I've got 3 major 4 hunts in the month of September. Oregon, 2 different hunts in Montana, 1 archery mule deer and antelope, 1 archery elk, and then the Texas bow openers the very end of September, believe it or not.
It's the fall is the crazy time, right? I mean, September, we're doing a bunch of trips. We've got 4 trips in September. It seems like if you had to pick one month, it seems like September might be the one. Do you think that's for all around fishing, hunting?
Oh, yeah. I think from a fishing, hunting, it's September, it's October, it's November. If somebody said to me, what month would you turn from 30 to 60 days? I think a lot of guys, particularly the elk aficionados, would choose September. I personally would choose November to stretch into 60 days from a hunting perspective. But the fall is a great time to be afield, rod or bow or rifle. Pick one, get out there, man.
Yeah. We did an episode recently with Fred. He's got this great company over out of Quebec, and they focus on all sorts of fishing and hunting and clothing and stuff. But we got into this conversation about the kill shot and hunting and how things like they're getting into some of this where people are even maybe like, because up there the caribou or you can't even hunt from anymore, right? That they've changed, and so people are just going out there, still kind of hunting, but they're not shooting. My question for you is just on this, like, what's your thought of the kill shot? All these videos of killing animals. Do you feel like there's different schools of thought in that? Like what's appropriate, any of that stuff with all this, everything going online, or do you even think about that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, you can, get any given evening, you can sit down on the outdoor channel or the sportsman channel and stay busy for hours on end. I think most people in the filming game, are pretty tasteful and tactful about that stuff. That brings up something that, certainly deserves conversation, David. And when you pull back a bow on something, you have got to be at the highest level of cognizance of what's about to take place. It's one thing, I shot a bunch of animals in Africa with a 375 H&H, and you can play all sorts of angles with something like that, or a 300 Weatherby, or even a simplistic 243 or 25-06, which I've shot loads of deer with all of that stuff. But boy, when you pull that bow, you are playing a shot selection that has got to be carefully thought out and executed, because that's not the 180 grade Nosler partition plowing through there. It's a broadhead. It kills by virtue of hemorrhaging is what it does. And it's an ungodly effective tool when properly placed. And the one thing that you always end up in these conversations with people, particularly that are new to it, is that, with a bow, ideally you want a broadside shot. Really, ideally, you want a slightly quarter away shot is the one you really want. And you need that animal to have that facing forward leg forward, meaning don't shoot with that onside leg closest to you as the archer. Don't shoot with that leg back. Wait for that animal to take that step forward and open up that chest cavity so that you get, heart long or double long.
Oh, wow.
And elk can take a beating like nothing you ever thought of. And, when you shoot in an elk, you've got a great responsibility with a bow. And the goal is to double lung that thing, not single lung them, because they can go and go and go on one lung knocked out, but to double lung them. And so pay attention to where that front leg is. Pay attention to that angle. Is it truly broadside? Is it quarter away? We don't really want the quarter two shots unless you are really confident in your placement. And I realized I spoke about that South Dakota buck that I shot pretty hard to, but I had an angle I thought I could make and I pulled it off. But it's not something I'd routinely try to do, because usually a quarter two shot ends up a liver hit, which means 3 to 8 hours of waiting for that animal to expire.
Yeah. So this gets very detailed. You got to not only, you think of rifle hunting, yeah, you got this area, you want to hit this spot, right? But it's kind of like a pie plate, it's this big area but with bow, you're talking like getting the legs set up right and all this. So because if you don't do that, the thing's going to run on you and you might lose it.
Well, if you don't do that, you're taking away what is really your prime target of that open cavity that represents hardened lungs. And liver hits will stuff. I mean, things don't survive liver hits, but more often than not, liver hits, which are back, that's the back hit, those require some real waiting on your part once you've figured out that's what's happened. And, the way something acts after hit, you see enough of this stuff, you can tell what got hit where by the way they react. And liver hits have a real telltale behavior with animals that usually run 40 to 80 yards, stop and look around like nothing happened. That's often a liver hit, and that deer is to be left for a while, like 3 hours minimum. And, I've seen stuff dying 45 yards off liver hits that just bled them out, but I've also seen them, go 800 yards and it took us a while to find them, and a great tracking job was, part of that. So archery involves a lot of different things, and an enormous amount of things have got to go right.
Gosh, it's way harder. Would you say, going back to that question I asked you earlier, going from conventional fishing to fly fishing, that's challenging. Do you think it's equally as hard, or it may be harder going from rifle to bow, being successful at actually getting an animal?
No, I think the rifle guy's used to hunting, right? He's used to using his binoculars. He's used to paying attention to the wind. And so those things roll right into archery. You'll pay more attention to the wind as a bow hunter than you ever did as a rifle hunter. That I can promise you. Just like you pay more attention to the wind as a Spey caster than you ever did as a single-handed guy. And you'll become very, very acute, familiar, and focused on your surroundings as a bow hunter. But I think the rifle guy can transition, and he can transition quickly. And I think one of the things that most guys who roll from a rifle to a bow is the challenge of getting closer. How close can I get? Really becomes incredibly inspirational. And oftentimes you've got to get, 12 yards, 22 yards. You've got to, just to even have a shot at something that is chosen to bed underneath a cut bank or on an eyebrow that, we've got to cut this range just to even have a shot when this thing stands up or this thing walks out. So, yeah, I don't go afield planning on taking 60-yard shots at deer, but you plan on taking them at antelope, 60 to 80. I plan on those and practice accordingly on that. But on deer, I'm looking to get as close to these things as I can get to them, let's Indian up on them, man. Let's do it.
How do you do that? How do you get super close to a deer? Talk about that. I'm sure there's all sorts of different situations, but how would you get up on a deer that's bedded down without spooking it?
Well, number one, make sure you know where he is. Make sure you know where he's bedded, and make sure he's bedded where you last saw him. Double check it. A lot of times when a deer first beds in the morning, he will bed a second time. He'll get up maybe 30 minutes later, maybe 2 hours later, he'll get up and he'll rebed, and that second bed will be the longer bed. Be aware of, have you seen him get up already? Have you not? Think about, if he does get up, is he going to go left, right? What's going to be his shade factor? What's the sun doing? That'll dictate what he does. What's the wind doing? Get it in your face. Use available noise. Wind is noise. An airplane overhead is a chance to take some steps. A truck on an interstate, even if it's 2 or 3 miles away, is a chance to take some steps. Play the wind, play noise to your factor. Go slow. Be meticulous. I killed a whitetail in North Dakota a couple years ago that I made a 2-mile stalk on. 2-mile stalk.
Wow.
And when I got 60 yards from him bedded, he was in a nest of bucks. There was 5 of them in there. And we had seen them 2 miles away, watched them bed, watched the big one bed. At 60 yards, we went into full sneak mode. And we're taking, that last, I shot him at 34. I thought I would be closer to him, but he wasn't bedded right where I thought he was, which meant he did get up and move. And from 60 yards to that 34, I don't know, might have been, that's, roughly, what is that, 26 yards? I'll bet you that 26 yards took me 50, 60 minutes. And then I sat on that buck, stood over him for 60 minutes, and a smaller buck got up. I think the wind did something. Small buck popped up and blew out of there. He popped up, looked around, stood there. I got a shot at him. But yeah, 2-mile stalk with the last 60 yards being really slow. Sometimes you're crawling. Sometimes you're taking a step with the gust of wind, or you're waiting for, some outside noise. Like I said, airplanes overhead will let you move. You'd be surprised what becomes your ally afield, but you'll soon learn because you'll be listening and looking and what can I do and how much noise is this step making in this grass and what do I need to do this?
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you surprised out there a lot while you're hunting with the with the bow?
Oh yeah, there's always something that goes on. I mean, a buck. I stalked a buck in the Dakotas a couple of years ago that I called Houdini. I saw him 3 times one day, stalked him 3 times, never could sort him out, never got a shot at him. Looked for him last year, couldn't find him. He's still alive. You have relationships with animals that survive, and it's like, hey, man, is that deer still around? Can we go look for him this year? You see all sorts of stuff. You jump other animals. One time in the Dakotas in North Dakota on a stalk to kill a mule deer, it was about an 800-yard stalk. I killed an antelope halfway into the stalk because I had both tags. And I'm stalking this deer. I had an antelope buck cross behind me, shot him at 43 yards. He went over a hill. I went over the hill to check on him. I shot him a second time, and I took an alternative route to the buck, which I'd already had mapped out from the original stalk. Took a secondary stalk that got me 15 yards from him, bedded, waited him out for an hour plus. He stood up, stretched, hard shot him at 15 yards on a stalk that I had already killed an antelope. So, yeah, is there stuff that's going to surprise you? Oh, yeah. Every stalk is an adventure, man.
That's all different. That's awesome. Well, let's take it out of here with this is our gear review shout out. I'm sure you know a little bit about optics, so I want to talk about that. Today's is presented by Trout Routes, who we use for kind of mapping streams. It does a lot of good stuff there. I'm curious, a couple of questions for you as we get out of here. Trout Routes obviously is awesome with all the streams, things like that. What's your mapping tool you use? Or do you use a mapping tool, electronic, or what are you using out there?
Well, you've got Onyx, you've got various things out there that can really help a guy with, getting a handle on private land, public land, reservation land, BLM, National Forest, blah, 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 blah. That stuff is handy, so on and so forth. You bring up optics, and optics is one of those things, don't skip on it. Buy, next to your bow, the next most expensive thing in your arsenal ought to be your binos and your rangefinder. Don't skip on that stuff.
What about a spotting scope? Are you using a spotting scope at all?
Oh, yeah. And, you can put big money into all this stuff. I mean, whether it's Swarovski or it's Leica, those are just two of and Zeiss. You can pour all sorts of money into all that stuff, and you should pour good money into it. But there's really good optics available from Vortex, from Leupold, so on and so forth. And I've got a mixed bag of stuff. I've got Leicas, I've got various and sundry of stuff. I've got small binos, I've got medium binos, I've got big binos. My spotting scope is an 18 power pair of Vortex binos that I can put on a tripod, and they're a bino, but they're essentially my archery spotting scope.
Do you use like an actual? Yeah, they have tripods. You're not necessarily putting it on a shooting stick sort of thing. What are you mounting your optics?
That 18 power bino from Vortex, 18 by 50 or 52, I forget which it is, but you can handhold that thing. But the minute you put it on a tripod and you set it up and operate it more as a spotting scope, even though it's a bino, your world will get better and effective really fast. So, yeah, lightweight tripod, whether it be spotting scope or a bino setup like that, is critical. It's something that's light and packable is certainly what to look for. My rangefinders, I've got Leupold, I've got Sig Sauer, I've got both of those. I'm a big Leupold fan on those. And again, I've got little tiny binos that sometimes are the archery stalker version, but kind of my favorites right now are I've got a set of 10 by 40 Leicas, which they're kind of my all-purpose bino. I don't really even know it's on my chest, and that's kind of my all-around favorite.
That's it. Yeah, there's a ton of good stuff, and I definitely Vortex Leupold. Those are two that I've been using, which are great. But yeah, it sounds like there's all sorts of good stuff out there. Okay, well let's again, I'm always thinking of trips. You've got a lot coming, so as we look ahead, what's your hunting You mentioned a few, but as you look out, do you have kind of a bucket list, one you haven't done? You just did the safari, so that sounds like probably one of those. Anything else that's left on your itinerary?
I'm a creature of habit, David. I find stuff and I like to go back and do it again. I plan to go back to Spain for roebuck. I plan to go back to Africa for Cape Buffalo with a rifle, but I also plan to go back to Africa for plains game with a bow. I've shot lots of plains game, an enormous amount actually, with a rifle in Africa, and I want to do a plains game gig with a bow. And so that's on the agenda. But, the biggest thing in my yearly hunting is archery deer.
Yeah. If you had to pick mule versus whitetail, which one, if you can only pick one?
Yeah, I like mule deer better, but I end up shooting more whitetails based on opportunity every year. But, I'm a big fan of mule deer. I don't know if I ever told you this. No. We could do a session on this alone, but I am the only person that's ever killed a mule deer in all 17 states they're in.
Oh, wow.
And I pulled that off in 2019 with the last buck that was in the state of Oklahoma, believe it or not.
Wow, so there's 17. So mule deer are native in 17 states in the country?
They're in 17 states, and most people can't even name them all because something's going to throw them off, like Kansas or Oklahoma. And they're actually in an 18th state, although subject to whether or not they survive the winters. And I'll bet you can't guess it.
I'm going to guess, just to be random, I don't know, Illinois?
Alaska.
Oh, Alaska.
There have been mule deer found in Alaska, not consistently, but mule deer have made it all the way to Fairbanks because one got hit by a car a couple of years ago. And I went into Fish and Game a couple of summers ago to talk to the biologist for that region, that Toke Fairbanks, to talk to him about the mule deer. And he said, yeah, they've made it in here from the Yukon, but these hard winters will knock them right out. And you would have to have multiple soft winters to think about hunting them. But that is state 18. It's not an official state, but there are mule deer in the state of Alaska.
Well, and how far do mule deer, what is the eastern extent of mule deer?
North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. You could slice those states. You could slice them right in half, east and west. And that far western, it's an eastern portion of North Dakota and it's not really eastern. Like I said, you could cut those states in half all the way down through Oklahoma. And the further south you get, the less east you're going to get. Oklahoma's really confined to the west. Kansas has got a little more to the east, as does the Dakotas and Nebraska. Nebraska is a sleeper state for mule deer, as is the Dakotas. But
yeah, they are.
Yeah, so think of it as midline in those states is kind of as far east as you see them, so on and so forth. And Texas has got lots of mule deer. They're in the Panhandle.
Oh, it does.
They're in West Texas. Yeah, I've killed a number of mule deer in Texas.
So is it just a climate, habitat? What keeps them from going further east?
I think they would have a hard time, number one, out competing whitetails, and they would tend to be subject to just dealing with whitetails, rather the whitetails in terms of the habitat, carrying capacity, the fact that whitetail bucks are extremely aggressive in the rut. I just think there's a point where they're just not going to get past that sort of thing. And so that, those places where they are is pretty settled. I think at this point in time, particularly in those states like Nebraska and Kansas, Oklahoma, they are where they are.
Yeah, that's it. They've evolved there. That's cool. Awesome, George. Well, one last one that we'll let you get out of here. So cats. I've been noticing on Instagram, occasionally I'll see a cat or two. What's going on with the cats? Do you have...
I'm a cat guy.
Yeah. How long have you been a cat guy?
Well, I've been a cat guy for a long time, but I've got two of them somewhere that I'm surprised one of them hasn't come up here on the table with me. I got two of them currently. One is a Maine Coon that's 22 pounds.
Oh, wow.
He's a monster.
Huge.
He's got a bobcat-like head. He's around here somewhere. I don't know where he is right this second. And then I've got a little tiny female that's 7.5 pounds. I named her Whittle, as in little. And the big boy is named Buddy Kitty. But yeah, I'm a cat guy. Cats, you want to learn how to stalk stuff, watch your cat. Your cat will train you in the fine art of stalking stuff. Watch your cats.
That's the biggest tip today is the cat. Yeah, the cat tip. That's awesome. Cool. All right, George. Well, I think we'll leave it there. We'll send everybody out to Mule Deer 16 on Instagram or State of Spey, and they can track you down more. I mean, we touched the surface on a lot of this. This has been a lot of fun catching up with you. I think we'll have to find another topic on the next one. But yeah, thanks again, George, and we'll be in touch.
Real good, Dave.
All right. Today's call to action: find your local archery store. Search it right now. See if there's a local archery store nearby, and get that first bow. Find out, maybe just stop by and check in with them if you're interested at all. Sounds like that's a good first stop. You can also check in with George anytime at Mule Deer 16. And I'm excited for this. I think this is the call to action I'm going to have. I'm going to check in on it as well. So let's follow up and circle back around then. If you get a chance, you like this episode, please let me know. You can follow the show so you get the next one delivered to your inbox. You can also send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. And I'm excited. We've got a bunch of trips coming up here. We still have a spot available for the Stillwater School. If you're interested in joining Phil Roy at this amazing place on the Henry's Fork, in the Henry's Fork area, Henry's Lake, the Stillwater School, we still have one spot remaining. All-inclusive. Phil's going to he always does, brings his game. If you haven't fished with Phil yet, this is your time to do it. We're heading out this September this year, so it's on right now. Check in with me, dave@wetflyswing.com, and let me know. Just put Stillwater in the subject line, and I'll follow up with you. All right, thanks again for checking in today. I hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening wherever you are in the world. Looking forward to catching you in that next episode. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.